All right, let's dive into an idea that on the surface sounds completely wrong. We're talking about the famous economist Milton Friedman and his claim that the very best scientific theories, well, they're often built on things that are just plain false. Let's see how that could possibly be true.
So let's just start with the quote that kicks this whole thing off. Friedman himself said that the most important, the most significant theories have assumptions that are wildly inaccurate. Now, your first reaction is probably, what? Isn't the whole point of science to get closer to the truth, to describe reality?
And that's the big question, right? How on earth can a theory that you know is built on something false be a good one, let alone a great one? Well, to solve this puzzle, we've got to take a step back and understand a really crucial distinction Friedman makes.
To get to the bottom of this, Friedman borrows an idea from the philosopher John Neville Keynes. He says we need to separate two totally different ways of looking at the world.
Okay, so he basically splits economics into two camps. On one side, you've got positive economics. Think of this as the what is side. It's all about being objective, scientific. It describes the world and makes predictions that you can actually go out and test with data. On the other side, you've got normative economics. This is the what ought to be side. It's all about values, opinions, and recommendations. For Friedman, keeping these two separate is absolutely critical.
Let's take the minimum wage debate. This is a perfect example. Friedman would argue that most people on both sides of the debate actually share the exact same normative goal. They both want people to have a decent living wage. The fight isn't about values. It's a positive disagreement. It's about predictions. One side predicts a higher minimum wage will reduce poverty. The other side predicts it will cause unemployment and actually make poverty worse. The whole argument is about what will actually happen.
So if positive economics is all about prediction, well, that completely changes the game for how we should judge a theory. It's not about how pretty the theory looks, it's about what it can do.
And for Friedman, this is it. This is the whole point of a scientific theory. Its job is not to be a perfect mirror of reality, not even close. Its one and only purpose is to give us a framework, a system, that makes correct predictions about what's going to happen when things change. That's the whole ballgame.
The process he lays out is basically the classic scientific method, but with a very specific focus. First, you create a simplified model of the world, your hypothesis. Then you use that model to figure out what it predicts will happen. And finally, and this is the most important step by far, you test those predictions against what you can actually see and measure in the real world.
So this is the absolute heart of the argument. It doesn't matter how realistic the assumptions inside your model are. It doesn't matter if it's a perfect description of every little detail. The only thing that matters is this: does it correctly predict what's going to happen? That is the one and only test.
And this leads us right to what you could call the realism trap. This is the huge mistake people make when they judge a theory based on how true to life its assumptions seem, instead on how well it actually predicts things.
You know, for more than 100 years, critics have loved attacking economic models for being unrealistic. They'll say, come on, real human beings aren't these perfectly rational, profit-maximizing robots. And of course they're right. Real people are messy, emotional, and complicated. A perfect example of this was a big debate over something called marginal analysis. Critics actually went out and interviewed business managers, and they came back saying, aha, we asked them, and none of them are actually calculating their marginal cost and marginal revenue curve, so your theory's assumptions are false. But Friedman said, that's completely the wrong test. The real question isn't whether they do the math, it's whether the theory predicts their behavior.
And this just nails his core idea. The theory isn't trying to be a psychology textbook that describes a manager's internal thought process. It's just a tool for predicting how the firm, as a whole, is going to react to changes in the market. The test is the behavior, not the biography.
And this brings up another fantastic point. The right unrealistic assumption totally depends on the question you're asking. So, if your problem is predicting what a new cigarette tax will do, Friedman says the simple model of perfect competition works beautifully. But if you're trying to predict how firms acted under price controls during World War II, that same model is useless. For that, you need a different simplification, like treating firms as monopolists. The assumption isn't true or false in some abstract sense. It's either useful or not useful for a specific purpose.
This all leads to what I think is the most powerful metaphor for understanding what a good theory is really supposed to be. It makes everything click into place.
Think of it this way. A roadmap is a false representation of reality, right? It's wildly inaccurate. It leaves out almost everything, every tree, every building, every single pothole. It's a massive simplification.
And that's exactly why the map is so incredibly useful. A theory isn't supposed to be a photograph. A photograph is perfectly realistic. It captures every single detail. But because of that, it's totally useless for navigation.
So the map is great because of its unrealistic simplicity. It gets rid of all the noise, all the irrelevant details, so it can focus on what's crucial for one specific task, telling you how to get from point A to point B. Its value is purely in its usefulness. A theory that tried to include every single variable in reality would be just like that photograph, perfectly realistic and perfectly useless.
And so Freeman leaves us with this challenge. The next time you come across a new idea or a theory, try to resist the temptation to ask, is it realistic? Instead, ask the much more powerful question, does it work? Does it make good predictions? Are you judging the map for not being a photograph, or are you judging it based on whether it gets you to your destination?